And we are already coming to the last guest of tonight. Let's welcome one of the rising stars of the German VC scene, Katharina Wilhelm. Before becoming an investor, she has worked at startups in the US and in Germany, and at the Boston Consulting Group. The past 3 years, she has spent investing in early-stage companies with a focus on enterprise and product-led growth software. Today, the true Münchner Kindle is principal at Index Ventures. That is a venture capital fund with headquarters in the US and Europe. And here she is looking for opportunities in early stage and late stage field. The pandemic has accelerated the digitalization all over the world. Our last guest of tonight knows where the unprecedented opportunities for entrepreneurs arise. A warm welcome to Katharina Wilhelm. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Felicitas. Super happy to be here and to be kind of involved in the CDTM program again, since I'm a big fan of it, not only for how hands-on it teaches entrepreneurship, but also how it supports and pushes the entrepreneurs of tomorrow. And I still remember actually that last February, like we all sat together in Augustina Keller with the then CDTM cohort. So I hope that at some point we'll be able to do it again. But yeah, I'm super excited to be here today. Index also has close ties to the CDTM since we're a G investor in Personio. And so thought kind of that it might be interesting to share a little bit about how we at Index see a tech-driven world post-COVID. And I mean, everybody has seen the drastic changes that the world has undergone over the past year. But now that we're actually 1 year in, I thought it's interesting because one can really see the effect and the impact of the pandemic. And so wanted to take the opportunity to, on the one hand side, share a few interesting data points that we have seen at Index over the past year. And with that, hopefully get across our excitement on what is yet to come. And I think we've all personally witnessed it and also professionally have witnessed it, just how connected our lives are to technology and how that has really only allowed to keep us going over the past year. I mean, on the personal side, we've stayed connected to our friends through FaceTime. We've started to work out at home through digital workout apps. We've done online museum visits, cooking workshops via Zoom, and all the more. And the same thing on the enterprise side, right? Like we've seen mass adoption of video conferencing tools. We've used all types of collaboration tools to stay in sync at home. And we've seen B2B enterprise companies replace their in-person handshakes with striking deals online. And so although that macro trend of digitization has gone on for a very long time, and I mean, Index has been around for the past 25 years, we've really seen what many title the change of a decade in just 1 year. And we've seen that in many ways across our portfolio. And so wanted to just share kind of how we've seen that along a couple of dimensions and why we still are excited for what's yet to come. And so the first dimension where we've really witnessed it is just how much we depend on the connectedness of the world and how technology helps us with this if we are cut off overnight. And I mean, you guys all know Slack, which is a portfolio company of ours, and can probably imagine how their messages have exploded during the initial lockdowns when companies have moved to home office policies practically overnight. But it's really impressive to hear the numbers. I mean, within the first few weeks of the lockdown last year, they added 2.5 million new users onto the 10 million existing ones, so 25% of their existing user base. And similarly, we've seen just how connected the world is, and when looking at supply chains of companies and how those have come under pressure and under scrutiny as travel and the flow of goods have been halted. And that's also where we still see a lot of opportunity to provide more transparency on the flow of goods, on supply chain risks, and to also help companies diversify their sourcing and their providers. Another dimension that I think was really interesting is just to see how much of a tremendous opportunity this has been for Acidlight companies and how they've been able to scale lightning fast and withstand the ever increasing demand through COVID. One example there is a company called Figma that we're also partnered with, that has allowed designers to collaborate online like flawlessly, and they've been really able to scale through the pandemic and help kind of people to collaborate. And that also certainly makes one of the big differentiators to companies in the .com area 20 years ago, where it was much harder and more expensive to scale companies, given, for example, the lack of cloud infrastructure. And so it's been really amazing to see how fast some of these companies have been able to really conquer the world overnight. And we see that in software, but it's really not limited to software. And we've seen over the past years whole industries being rebuilt by tech. So we've all witnessed, obviously, the explosion around quick grocers like Dija and Gorillas, and the share of online grocery sales has doubled in the UK over the past year. And that's really a change that we expect to be clearly lasting as consumers get hooked to the convenience once they've tried it out, and they will never stop ordering. And we've seen that more broadly, though, as well with our company Rolik, which is not only doing e-grocery, but rethinking grocery at a fundamentally new level with its own warehouses. And so we see just kind of how new companies disrupt the entire industry that they're operating in. And we see the same in healthcare, where upon the start of the pandemic, digital or phone consultations have gone up to 92%, up from 15% that is finally coming around. And that's really also evidenced by the fact, the data that our portfolio company that's known as Livy and Crew has been experiencing since they've really seen twice the demand since the start of the pandemic. And that also holds true for many other sectors, right? I think finance and a couple of others. And the third dimension, I think, that is interesting is that the last year has also just shown that there are many business models that can reach like a next level of scale that people might have previously not thought, and that we see digital native companies reaching scales that have been unprecedented. And one example there, for example, is our portfolio company Robinhood, which we've partnered with in the seed, and they've seen really unprecedented growth as first-time investors started to make their first steps into investing, and they've reached a scale that is not only large for fintechs, but even for banks. And I mean, Robinhood is based in the US, but we see similarly large outcomes in Europe. And I think one great example there, I mean, is Adyen, which is also a company that we've partnered with early on at the Series A, and that has gone public a few years ago, but they've hit a 57 billion euro market cap, which I think is just amazing to see, and like an amazing testament to the European ecosystem and just how large companies can become there. But we also see it in private markets. So if you think that in Europe, there's now companies being valued at $6 billion just a couple of years into their existence, that's something that clearly evidences the ongoing maturity of the European ecosystem and the scale of outcomes that we can see. I mean, for context, Zalando, when they went public in 2014, they were valued around the same. And that was the largest IPO since the listing of Deutsche Telekom in 2000. So we really see here what's possible in a world that has been taken by storm of digitization more broadly. And then lastly, I think one space that we're very excited about and that we've seen strong movements in is the creator space. So where people throughout the last months and year might have been pushed or might have finally made. One interesting example there is our portfolio company Patreon, that has shown that by allowing creators to offer perks and rewards to their subscribers, they can really kind of help these creators monetize, and they've shown just an amazing amount of money that they were able to distribute to creators over the past year. And it's also obviously evidenced by Shopify, which has been able to double their GMV last year. And that's already from amazing levels. Like, I mean, they've now reached 125 billion in GMV. But I think is also a trend that we continue to see accelerated, and where we see like just interesting new ways of commerce popping up. And And so those are a couple of things that we've seen over the last year. But I think what's almost more exciting is that we at Index feel that we're still only at the beginning. And one data point I think that Mark said really clearly is the fact that e-commerce adoption has made a big leap forward over the past year, but it still only makes out 17% of global retail sales. And so you just see that there is still a lot of room to grow. And we see that in other spaces as well. For example, kind of while gaming has become ubiquitous as a way of entertainment, we finally also see new target groups going on there and seeing, for example, more girls building their own worlds on Roblox. And so there's plenty of opportunities that we continue to be excited about and where we think there's room for great companies. I think, or I thought it could also be interesting to talk a little bit about how the pandemic has created a whirlwind in our own industry, which I think overall has been largely beneficial to entrepreneurs, to be honest. I think starting with the fact that it's been remote fundraising for the past year, and COVID has allowed entrepreneurs to raise large rounds pretty much from their desk at home. And funds had to grow increasingly more comfortable investing in without meeting people in person. And that has really been a great equalizer, I think, to the ecosystem, since it allows entrepreneurs not only to tap into a larger pool of funds and a larger pool of capital, but it's also been majorly beneficial for companies sitting outside of the major tech hubs. Something that we've clearly seen over the last few months as founding rounds were happening outside of, for example, Berlin and Munich, but all across Germany. I think the pandemic has also allowed us to spend more time with entrepreneurs. Like, since traveling basically has largely been eliminated, we've been able to speak with more companies and through that meet more entrepreneurs, which has been great. And a couple of other things, that we've prioritized is, for example, data science and seeing just the most interesting companies and helping us kind of get a pulse there on each ecosystem, which is obviously more important as we see more global competition through remote fundraising. And I think what we've thought a lot about as well is how do we, though, in a light where you only meet people via Zoom, come up with new ways of building meaningful relationships and trust without being able to meet in person. And that's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and that I would actually encourage everyone that is starting a company to think about clearly and take it seriously, because you want to get a feel for whether you like working with this person and with this fund, and you want somebody on your team that you can count on in the highs and in the lows. And so, at Index, our goal is to invest in transformational tech opportunities from origin to IPO, and we're incredibly excited for what is yet to come. So we continue to believe that now is the best time to start a company. There's more capital than there was ever in the market, which allows you to hire better talent faster and allows you to go to market faster. There's generally incredible talent that we see coming out of the European ecosystem that now has experience from other startups and scale-ups. As said, I think the pandemic just offers a really nurturing ground for a lot of new groundbreaking opportunities. And so with that, happy to answer any questions, and thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot to you for sharing all your insights and also the good news for all the aspiring founders among us. And let's jump right into the Q&A. The first question I have for you is, post-COVID, in your opinion, what will stay, what will go back to how things were before?
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's something that we think about a lot as well. I think what will definitely go back is that people want to meet in person and that people want to go to the office. I think with any ecosystem that's starting to open up, take New York, you see that it immediately bounces back that people want to meet. And so I think that's clearly something that will just bounce back. I hope that there will continue to be more flexibility. I think working from home a couple of days per week, taking first calls via Zoom rather than meeting in person. I think that's all things that will stay. And I would almost also hope that what continues to be eliminated is that you fly for one meeting to somewhere rather than kind of then really kind of spending a dedicated amount of time in one ecosystem and then to the next. So that like will be a little bit more thoughtful around that.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. The next question goes into the direction of opportunities in the B2B SaaS space. What's your take on defensibility in B2B SaaS while observing, for example, Microsoft copying really innovative products like Slack with Microsoft Teams or Airtable with Microsoft Lists?
Yeah, I think that's a question that we get asked all the time. I think we're still very excited about all the opportunities that lie ahead. I think entrepreneurs have consistently proven that they come up with the great ideas. And yes, while that's true that kind of Microsoft often comes up then with their own solutions, you also often see that companies, especially large companies, are just very focused on their own products and then actually fail to really kind of think in a very innovative way or in a just kind of way that maybe rethinks distribution, rethinks kind of use cases. And I think that's, for example, something that we've seen with our portfolio company Pitch, where I think the fact that the team built that up from the ground and almost sometimes maybe ignored user feedback because they wanted to kind of think more out of the box rather than think in like pain points that have been witnessed with existing software is something that like we believe will always trump just corporates building their own solutions. And I think we've seen that also by the outcomes that have been possible in the market.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And the next question is about the VC landscape. Is the VC landscape becoming increasingly competitive, or is that a subjective impression?
Interesting question. Yeah. Look, I think it's definitely becoming more competitive because what you see is that also the US funds now have noticed that kind of Europe is an incredibly interesting ecosystem and there's large companies to be built here. And so we've seen obviously more funds being active here in the region. We've seen more funds starting a presence in the region. And so with like more eyes looking on the same deals, obviously it becomes more competitive. I think with Index, we're in a great position since we've been here for 25 years and have collected a lot of regional experience and how to work with entrepreneurs here and also in the US. But overall, I think it's definitely becoming more competitive. And you see that also by just funds becoming more stage agnostic and investing like often earlier than they initially were kind of started with.
And now coming to the last question for you of tonight. That is, what is your bet on live shopping? Will we shop in the future like Chinese? If so, what needs to be changed for the European market?
Yeah, interesting. Also something that we've looked at. I think it's a super interesting trend. And I mean, as the question asker stated, I think in China, that's absolutely the norm. So I do think that at some point, that will also come to Europe for sure. I think TBD and what types of formats, whether that's on the website itself or whether that's like a separate platform or only for specific products. There, I also won't be able to forecast the future, but it's something that we're closely monitoring and also a trend that we're very excited about.
Questions and for joining us tonight. It was really an honor having you here, at least virtually in Munich. So I wish you a good evening.